women and crime. And I think you're going to enjoy this, particularly the fourth trial. The fourth trial is something special. All of these crimes that are documented are associated with harem conspiracies, where the women of the harem got together and decided they were going to knock off the pharaoh for one reason or another. Usually it was because they had a son that they wanted him to be the next pharaoh. And the pharaoh who's sitting on the throne now has got another son that is more likely to be. So if they get rid of him, they got a better chance that her son would end up being the pharaoh. That's usually the motivation of harem conspiracies. Pepi comes from the Old Kingdom. You see almost 2000 to 2500 BC. And he has a pyramid that's very interesting, but it's made out of mud brick. And right now it's just a pile. The mud brick doesn't last only a few hundred years in Egypt, but it's not like stone pyramids. Stone pyramids, there's an old saying that people fear time, but time fears the pyramids. Pyramids are forever. It's not really well documented, but one of his queens led the conspiracy. Weret Empties. The plan was thwarted, and Weret Empties was punished. We don't know exactly what her punishment was, but usually a woman from the harem who incited a conspiracy was killed. One report drawn apart by horses, but that report couldn't be right because there were no horses in Egypt at that time. Amenemhat. I'm going to read about his advice to teaching of Amenemhat. 7 copies of this literary masterpiece exist. We get an account of the murder by Amenemhat talking about dreams. And he's warning his son against treachery and so forth. I'm going to tell you what he wrote about that. Supposedly he wrote about that. This was written, the actual writing took place quite a number of years after Amenemhat was killed. So if this is what he said, it was passed down by word of mouth until some scribe documented it. The teachings of Amenemhat. It was after supper when night had fallen, and I had spent an hour of happiness. No, we think he's talking about a woman. He spent the hour with a woman. I was asleep upon my bed, having become weary, and my heart had begun to fall asleep. When weapons of my counsel were wielded, I had become like a snake of the necropolis. As I came to, picture that, I had become like somebody's trying to kill a snake. Can you imagine? He's the snake. As I came to, I woke to fighting and found that it was an attack of my bodyguard. Had any woman previously raised troops? Had revolt happened in the palace? If I had quickly taken weapons in my hand, I would have made the wretches retreat with a charge. But there is none mighty in the night, none who can fight alone. No success will come without a helper. Look, my injury happened while I was without you. When the entourage, I think he's talking about his son. He was without his son. When the entourage had not yet heard that I would hand the throne over to you, when I had not yet sat beside you, that I might make counsels for you. This is an interesting point. Amenemhat is the first man that we've heard of who had a co-regency. He made his son Pharaoh rule at the same time he was on the throne. And after that, it happened several times. For I did not plan it, I did not foresee it, and my heart had not taken thought of the treachery of servants. That's the teachings of Amenemhat. He suggests a woman has stirred up a revolt to keep his sons Senusret from the throne. Remember, this is, when you see that, remind me to read something. Okay, that's what that's for. the harem conspiracy against Ramses III. Now, Ramses III, 31 years. He was there. He was pharaoh for quite a number of years, and he built a huge mortuary temple, harem, on the West Bank, right across from Luxor. His known wives, Queen wife Isis, and others, Tai and Titi. In year 5, he was attacked by the Libyans from the west. Every now and then, the Libyans really had mostly desert, and their springs and wells would dry up, and they would look over at Egypt and say, they still got food over there. You know, the Nile doesn't dry up. And so the Libyans, when they really had bad times, the same thing happened up around Mesopotamia, an area between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. When those rivers, lakes and streams would dry up, and they didn't have any vegetables, couldn't grow any crops, they would try to invade Egypt from the northeast, whereas the Libyans were coming directly from the west across the desert. In year 8, they were invaded by the Sea Peoples, which was a conglomerate of folks who came from the area around Greece and Cyprus and that more westerly part of the Mediterranean. In the year 11, that's when the Libyans attacked again. Rather, one scribe reports there were 175 dead. Now, when the battle is over, the pharaoh wants to know how many of the enemy got killed, and so the soldiers are required to cut off the hand of a guy they killed and throw it in a pile where it could be counted. Well, the pharaoh said, I see that pile of hands. I think y'all got some left hands in there with them. So he sent them back out to cut off a different part, and I'm not going to mention what it was, and throw it in a pile so they could get an accurate count. The harem, a palace of intrigue. This is Medinet Habu. This is the great, huge mortuary complex and harem that Amenhotep III Ramses III built. He calls it the House of a Million Years, and this is a reinforcement of the business that when the pharaoh needed a place to live, and he was only, in his physical life, he was only going to be there like 100 years at the most. He didn't care if it was made out of mud brick. But after he died, when he came into eternal life, he wanted a place that would last forever. And so Ramses III calls this his Palace of a Million Years. I'm not driving too well tonight. The harem was an independent institution similar to the king's. It had its own infrastructure, administered by males. These were, the people were called priests, although they really were like servants of the pharaoh or of the queen, the principal wife, or the mother. The mother of the pharaoh also had a similar place. Administered by males and endowed with lands and cattle and a network of officials. Things that they couldn't get themselves were delivered to them. And some of the women in the harem were employed making textiles, weaving cloth from flax, that sort of thing. Royal children were raised in the harem. In this temple at Medinet Habu, the indoor parts have fantastic colors still on them. We don't know if those are the original colors, but it looks like they were. Interesting thing about these colors, if the colors are not exposed to daylight and air, they last a long time in the desert. And one of the reasons is that the colors are basically stone. Iron oxide, rust, has a range of colors from bright yellow to dark red depending upon the particle size, but it's all the same chemical compound. Malachite, a range of different colors of green. Now there's a lot of blue used in Egypt, but they don't have any blue. They get their blue from lapis lazuli and it comes from the area around Persia to the northeast of where they are. The point I was going to make is that you can't take a powdered rust powder and make a paint out of it. You got to have a carrier of some kind. We don't know for sure what the carriers were, but in all probability they were egg white or olive oil perhaps, but there was some organic compound. Now over the years, the organic compound doesn't last very long in the sun and the air. It's going to turn to carbon dioxide and water. See, I have a PhD in chemistry. Anyway, so even though the carrier is gone, the material is strongly adhered to the wall, and those colors will remain as long as there's not attacked by air and oxygen and sunlight. The sunlight creates free radicals which attack all kinds of things. It actually turns some of the oxygen in the air into ozone, very small quantities. The harem conspiracy against Ramses III. This is well documented by three different papyruses: the Judicial Turin Papyrus, the Lee Papyrus, and the Roland Papyrus. A revolt was initiated by a minor wife, Tai. She wanted her son Pentawere to inherit the throne instead of Ramses IV, the son of Isis. That would have been his principal wife. In this picture that we have here, the pharaoh's wearing a blue crown, which is usually worn when he is performing an administrative task, like two neighbors are arguing over who shot the cow or something like that, and they come to him to get him to make a decision about what's to be done. The harem conspiracy. Now this is a list of the defendants. Ramses III appointed a special prosecutor, or several, so to speak. A minor queen, of course, she's the one that stirred the pot and got things going. Mesedsure, a butler. Many of these people were butlers, and many were inspectors of the harem. Wherein Peluca, Yenin, Pekamen, Vedula, Benyak, Kerpes, Kamopet. Interesting name. Opet is the name of a celebration festival that's a big party that occurs once a year. Once a year, the image of the god Amun residing in the great temple at Karnak is taken out of the niche in the wall, the temple, once a year, put on this exorbitant big cedar barge on the Nile and floated upstream, pulled upstream, about 2 miles, I guess it is, to the temple of Luxor, which is where the wife of the temple of Luxor is where the spiritual wife of Amun resides. And when that occurs once a year, it's a big party. It's called the festival, the Opet Festival.
What was their duties of the inspector of the harem?
Well, I don't know, but there have been a run for many different things. You know, one of them is make sure they get the dishes washed after supper, and another one's going to say, have you guys got the weeds out of the grain field yet, you know, and so forth. That type of thing. You can imagine the normal routines that you would go through with daily living. Preparation of food, you know, doing the cooking and so forth. So these are kind of important people because they're not doing the work so much as overseeing. Now some of these butlers may be involved more closely with actual hands-on work, but the inspectors are just seeing that everybody's doing their job in the area that they're responsible for. Setim Pertoth, Petwint Amen, inspector of the harem, Peri, overseer of the palace, Benemwesi, captain of the Nubian archers. This is kind of important. Many Egyptian armies had Nubian archers because they were good. The Nubians were really good fighters, and often Nubian young men would enlist, so to speak, in an Egyptian army because they could send their salary home, so to speak. 6 wives of gatekeepers, and in Pentawari, the son of Tai, the fellow that she wanted, her son that she wanted to be the next pharaoh. The plot was discovered, the guilty were arrested, Ramses III commissioned a trial. And you're going to laugh when I tell you about the 4th trial, but there were 14 judges, 7 royal butlers, 2 treasury officials, 2 army standard bearers. Each division of the army is named after a particular god. There will be the division of Amun, the division of Seth, the division of Isis, and so on. And each one of those divisions has a standard bearer who carries a pike with the image of that god on the top. I'll just tell you about a little problem that kind of comes from the Army's general operating procedures. Suppose one of the protectorates, one of the countries on the edge of Egypt who is threatened by other countries, and Egypt just says, we'll send our army up there. If they attack you, they attack us, so we'll take care of you, we'll protect you. And so they don't have any trouble for a number of years, and they decided to quit paying taxes. And the Pharaoh's got to take his army and go up there and knock them around a little bit and say, hey, you guys need to pay your taxes. On the way, he takes one of the princesses back and puts her in the harem, because they're not going to attack him as long as the chief's daughter is in the harem. But the problem arises because there are 3 power structures in Egypt. There are the priests, the civil government, and the army. And at one time or another, one or the other of those is sort of in ascension in the power. If you look at what's happened to Egypt in the last 3-4 years, the stability they have there right now is due to the army. There's this fellow General Sisi. And that has been true since prehistoric times, I guess. The Egyptian army, for some short periods of time, some other group may rule the country, but the Egyptian army eventually comes back and restores order. 2 army standard bearers. I was going to tell you about the problem that comes from this. So the army goes out to this country up north who quit paying taxes, and they knock them around and tell them, you guys need to pay your taxes. And while we're at it, we're going to take some tribute back for the Pharaoh. So they come back with a wagon load of gold. And because they are the division of Amun, who is their patron god for that division of the army, they go to the great temple of Amun at Karnak and contribute some money to the priests in gratitude for the priests blessing them with a favorable wind during the battle. Now, the problem that the Pharaoh has with this is that the money that is contributed to the priests is not taxed. The priests are not taxed. If they raise grain and so forth, they're exempt. They're like a tax-free unit. Well, over a long period of time, the priests got more and more powerful. They take that gold that the army brought back and they buy more land on the edge of where they are, and they send more guys out there to farm that land. They sell that grain and so forth. So Amenhotep III, father of Akhenaten, who was actually Amenhotep IV until he changed his name to Akhenaten, he saw this. He saw that the priests were becoming much too powerful, and these were the priests of Amun. And so, to try to weaken the priests of Amun at Karnak, he built a small chapel there to a different god. And I don't remember exactly who that was. That was an attempt to weaken the power of the priests of Amun. It didn't work. And Akhenaten, his son, Amenhotep, Amenhotep IV, was watching this. So when Amenhotep III died, Akhenaten said, I'm not going to mess around with this fighting with these priests of Amun. I'm closing that temple down. And I'm picking up this town and all of its officials and everything. I'm moving it downriver about 60, 70 miles. I'm going to build a new town at a place called Tel El Armana. And not only that, but we're not worshiping all these old gods anymore. There's only one God, and his name is the Aten, Aten. And instead of having the name Aken Amun, named for the god Amun, who's the god at Karnak, I'm going to be named after the Aten, the sun at its highest point. My name is now Akhenaten, brother of or son of the Aten. And he said, all you folks up and down the river who used to go to the various priests and ask them to pray for your good crops in your fields and so forth, you don't need to do that anymore. Those boys are out of business. Their shops are closed. Anybody wants to offer a prayer to God, you got to go through me. I'm the one that talks to God, and he's the one that talks to me. And there's only one God. Everybody else is out of business. So here are some of the people. The army standard bearers, 2 scribes and 1 herald. Now, I guess these fellows are the ones who wrote some of these papyruses that document what happened with the trial and so forth. They were given full power to call witnesses and see evidence, but they also had the power to deliver the verdict and carry out the sentence, which was not exactly equal distribution of power among 3 different organizations. The harem conspiracy was a dangerous situation. The conspirators were close to the king. They knew the king, or they were, in his cabinet or his inner circle of servants and so forth. There's also evidence to get all the farmers with pitchforks and torches outside of, the townspeople involved in this thing as well. Over 40 people were implicated. They were tried in groups. The record of her trial is not available, but she would not have been allowed to live since she was the principal instigator of this attempt. In the first trial, 28 people were condemned to die, probably to die, and that's a bunch. But then remember, there were 40 people involved as defendants. In the second prosecution, 6 were forced to commit suicide in the court. That was where the judges and so forth could see that they did. And then in the third prosecution, 4 of them were condemned to die in their cells. There was a 4th prosecution, but it wasn't anybody involved in the conspiracy. No. The problem was that the judges in these trials, once there were people sentenced to die or other punishments and so forth, some of them I forgot, well, we'll see this in a minute. Not all the punishments were of death. In the fourth trial, you'll see some people were given other punishments. But the 4th trial was a trial of the judges and officials who did these things, because they decided to have a little celebration, and they partied with the people who were condemned to die. The judges, the court officials from earlier trials, they entertained several women conspirators and a general by the name of Paius. One of these judges was found innocent. Others were condemned to have their ears and nose cut off. Yeah, now. Mm-hmm. One convicted Pebes committed suicide before the sentence could be carried out. And it looks like, because the records don't record his reaction to the trials or record his presence at the trials, it's presumed that he didn't live long enough to see the end of these activities. Okay, now I think last time or the time before we played the audio-visual slide presentation of the 21 women who are guarding the 12 gates of night, where the sun god dies in the west and comes through these 12 gates to be reborn again in the morning when the sun comes up. And we will, if the time permits, we will go to this accounting. It's more of a fable than an actual historical record. The story of the two brothers, one of them's named Truth and the other one's named Falsehood. And in that story, an unkind woman is thrown to the crocodiles. Now, let's see where we are. We're running pretty good on time, so I would suggest that we take maybe a 10-minute break here, and let me get set up, and I'm going to play this audio slide production for you, and I think you're going to enjoy it. It's again, it's from this translation that was done of a papyrus in a British museum. And narrated by Gene Houston. The name of the translator, again, escapes me. I'll think of it in a moment. But Awakening Osiris was the name of her book, written after she translated this for her master's degree in Egyptology. She was actually from the University of Chicago, Oriental Institute, but she was doing her degree, her master's work, on a papyrus at the British Museum under the supervision of Sir Wallace Budge. And this audio-visual presentation, I'll tell you what, I'm going to show you some text. So, because the narration goes pretty quick, and in some cases, it's a little hard to know exactly what she is referring to. But she talks about how before the sun god was created, Temu was not visible even to himself until the sun god was created. And there was no division between the earth and the sky. Nothing between them. They were just one blended thing. But in any event, this narration goes on to talk about how the world was created, and one of the keys to the creation was that when the Creator God wants to create a fish, he invents a word. The word's going to be fish. He says fish, and now there's fish. So he creates everything. He creates everything by naming them: mountains, sea and sky, and so on. The narration moves on into areas of religion, and it talks about Akhenaten. It refers to Akhenaten closing the temples and casting out the gods, and it refers to the fact that you will die if you cast out God, and the punishment for that is that you will cease to be. You will be nothing, you are nothing, and you were nothing. And that is your there's an Italian term for it, damnatio ad infinitum, or something like that. Damned to infinity. When she says, do you know who you are? When she says that, she is referring to something we talked about earlier, that there is no difference between life in the divine world and life in the physical world. You remember we talked about that. We said that if you made your way into eternal life, you would continue to do the same things in the divine world that you did in the physical world, and you would not know the difference. That you could pinch your arm in the divine world and it would hurt the same as it would in the physical world. And you remember the secret trick for how you could tell whether you were in the divine world? You look down and see if your shadow has separated from you. That's the only way you can tell you're in the divine world. That your shadow is flying with the sun god from the birth in the east to death during the day, so he can't be there attached to you. Yes?
I'm reminded of a popular song, I don't know, maybe from the 1930s.
Me and my shadow?
Exactly. Strolling down the
Strolling down the avenue. Yeah, I like that song. I think one of the important points to come out of this narration by Jean Houston is the end there where she says, Osiris and Ra are one. The God of the afterworld and the God of the present world, they're the same God, just in a different time-space continuum. Any other questions about that? Well, I'll tell you what, we'll spend a few minutes on the fable of truth and falsehood. You know, I'm going to take a side trip here for a minute. I got a couple hundred books on ancient Egypt, and of course I've got about a dozen trips there. And over the years, I've collected a lot of information. And at one point, I sat down and wrote a couple pages on my views of the ancient Egyptian religion and so forth. I stuck that in here in case we had a few minutes. So I'm gonna read you some observations. These are largely opinions, but they're opinions based on a lot of research. Okay. Some principles of ancient Egyptian religion. My interpretation. It is the sun god who awakens you each morning. We live according to a higher plan. We rise from sleep each day and raise our arms just as a seed buried in the ground, nourished by the sun god, pushes up through the ground and rises towards Ra. When a star begins to appear in the sky, it signals the start of the death of Ra. Each day he goes into darkness where our corpses are butchered. Ra, who is a fire, needs a boat after dark to travel the underground river to a new beginning each day. Without the boat, his fire will be quenched by the water when he travels the river. Remember, I said the Egyptians knew that there was a river in the sky also because it leaked every 100 years. Yeah. He is protected by guardians and spells during his journey, his underworld journey. If we are lucky, behave well, and know the secret codes, we will make the journey with him. We will often wonder whether we are in the alive world or in the spiritual world. After I die, my Ba spirit will be a bird with my face, and I will fly across the sky with the sun god. That's the shadow's form during that travel during the day. At night, I will return to rest in my mummified body. In the beginning, there was no earth and sky. There was only darkness and the primordial sea of being, a nutria encompassing all. A voice rose in this sea. It was the original creator god, Temu, the will to live. He created himself, then uplifted the sun god, Ra. Ra shone back on Temu in gratitude, and that was the first day of the world. He created life and every living thing. He gave man the power to create himself and the possibility of living eternally with the gods unless he commits suicide. If he kills himself, then he has cast God out and shall be nothing, will have been nothing, will be nothing. But one day Temu will take back what he has given, a judgment day, ? Time will swallow itself. There are writings which describe the passage of time as life passing through the body of a long snake. Meanwhile, we have yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Come, fill the cup. What boots it to repeat how time is slipping underneath our feet? Unborn tomorrow and dead yesterday. Why fret about them if today be sweet? Omar Khayyam, about 1100 AD. I will experience, it is the impending darkness which makes man shine brightest. That is the destiny of man in the house of Osiris. When man dies, he becomes an Osiris. I will experience resurrection in the house of Osiris. I rise from the ashes and I live forever. I am a phoenix. My birth is like the story of Horus, how her tears over the corpse of her husband stirred his memory, and the child Horus was conceived. Just as weeds and vegetables grow, burn up and die, then the seeds are blown into the earth to be reborn. Also we are born, live and die. Life and death are endless. The process of life is death. Regeneration is our children. Just as the seed of wheat is planted, its purpose is to know the sickle. So man's purpose is to die. He may sacrifice himself, choosing death rather than life. But if he grieves, then he is man, and he creates of himself through his children something immortal. Well, those were just things that I thought about while I was contemplating the viewpoints of authors of the scripts. Okay, this is the legend of truth and falsehood. A dishonorable woman appears in the tale of truth and falsehood. Here a woman satisfies her lust for the handsome Truth, the younger man, who is in a bad way, having been falsely accused in court. He's the older one, I think, by falsehood. Blinded as a punishment and cast out. Subsequently, the woman fails to treat Truth honorably. Even though she bears him a son, she makes him her doorkeeper, a menial job outside the house proper. The lost beginning of this 19th dynasty fable may be summarized as follows. Truth and falsehood are brothers. Falsehood, the younger brother, has denounced truth to the Ennead. The Ennead is the council of the gods who sit in judgment. He claims that he had lent to Truth a wondrous dagger of extraordinary size, and Truth had failed to return it to him. He proceeds to describe the dagger. All the copper of Mount Yal has gone into the making of its blade. The timber of the grove of Koptos was its haft. The god's tomb was its sheath. The cattle of Cal formed its belt. Then falsehood said to the Ennead, "Let truth be brought. Let him be blinded in both eyes, and let him be given to me as a doorkeeper of my house." And the Ennead did all that he had asked. Now many days after this, falsehood raised his eyes to see, and he observed the virtue of Truth, his elder brother. Then falsehood said to two servants of Truth, "Take your master and cast him into a savage lion with many lionesses." So they took him. Now as they went up with him, Truth said to his servants, "Do not take me, find me a little bread. Go and tell falsehood, when we had left him, a lion came out of the house." And there are broken places in the papyrus where the story is missing, and then it picks up. The lady went out of her house accompanied by her servants. They saw him, Truth, lying beneath a thicket, and he was a handsome man. There was none like him in the whole land. They went to where the lady was and said, "Come with us and see the blind man lying beneath the thicket. He should be brought back and made doorkeeper of our house." The lady said, "Hasten to him, I want to see him." They went and brought him back, and when the lady saw him, she desired him very much, for she saw that he was handsome in all his body. He slept with her that night and knew her with the knowledge of a man, and she conceived a son that night. Now many days after this, she gave birth to a boy whose like did not exist in the whole land. He was tall, he was like the child of God. He was sent to school and learned to write very well. He practiced all the arts of war, and he surpassed his older companions who were at school with him. Then his companions said to him, "Whose son are you? You don't have a father." And they reviled him and mocked him. "Hey, you don't have a father." Then the youth said to his mother, "What is the name of my father? I want to tell it to my companions, for they quarrel with me. Where is your father? So they say, and they mock me." His mother said to him, "You see the blind man who sits by the door? He is your father." So she said to him. Then he said to her, "You deserve that your family be gathered and a crocodile be summoned." The youth brought his father inside, made him sit on an armchair, placed a footrest under his feet, and put food before him. He gave him to eat, and he gave him to drink. Then the youth said to his father, "Who blinded you? I will avenge you." He said to him, "My young brother blinded me." And he told him all that had happened to him. He went off to avenge his father. He took 10 loaves of bread, a staff, a pair of sandals, a water skin, and a sword. He fetched an ox of very beautiful color, and he went to where the herdsman of falsehood was. He said to him, "Take for yourselves these 10 loaves, the staff, the water skin, the sword, and the sandals, and guard my ox for me until I return from town." Now many days after this, when his ox had spent many months with falsehood's herdsman, falsehood came to the fields to view his cattle. Then he saw the ox of the youth, which was exceedingly beautiful in color. He said to the herdsman, "Give me this ox, I want to eat it." The herdsman said to him, "It is not mine, I cannot give it to you." Then falsehood said to him, "Look, all my cattle are in your charge, give one of them to its owner." Then the youth heard that falsehood had taken his ox. He came to where the herdsman of falsehood was and said to him, "Where is my ox? I do not see it among your cattle." The herdsman said to him, "All my cattle are yours, take one you like." The youth said to him, "Is there another ox as big as my ox? If it stood on Almun's island, the tip of its tail would lie on the papyrus marshes, while one of its horns would be on the western mountain and the other on the eastern mountain. The great river is its resting place, and 60 calves are born to it daily." The herdsman said to him, "Does there exist an ox as big as you say?" Then the youth seized him and took him to where falsehood was, and he took falsehood to court before the Ennead. They said to the youth, "What you have said is false. We have never seen an ox as big as you say." The youth said to the Ennead, Is there a dagger as big as you said, one that has Mount Yal in it for copper, in whose haft is the grove of Coptus, whose sheath consists of the tomb of the god, and its belt of the herds of Cal?" And he said to the Ennead, "Judge between truth and falsehood. I am his son. I have come to avenge him." And falsehood took an oath by the Lord, saying, "As Owen lives, as the ruler lives, if truth is found alive, I shall be blinded in both eyes, and shall be made doorkeeper of the house of truth." And the youth led the Ennead to where his father was, and he was found to be alive. They then inflicted punishment upon falsehood. He was smitten with 5 open wounds, blinded in both eyes, and made a doorkeeper of the house of truth. Thus they settled the dispute between truth and falsehood. I like these fables. They're interesting. Maybe we should do the series on literature for our next one. Well, this is our last session, and thank you for coming, and I appreciate your being here. Well, thank you.